spend approximately 11 hours every year resetting passwords and regaining access to accounts. So if you put that into the perspective of a big organization like the size of Vodafone, and an average salary of £40,000 a year, it costs the company over £20 million every year in lost productivity. So it's clear that the tools we use to trust the people behind the computer do not work. Trust is a two-way street, and it can be very expensive. We want to trust our customers. Businesses want to trust their customers. Customers expect this trust to be returned, and when trust fails, it can cost millions to organizations. And to trust our employees, we make them, our customers, we make them jump through a lot of hoops. We make them log in. We make them verify. We make them authenticate using multiple factors. Or even worse, we make them use Okta. To be trusted by our customers, we tell them how much we care about their data, and we create privacy policies that nobody reads. And we spend $250 billion in solutions every year for anti-fraud and security. And we hire specialized platforms to transfer the data around and do our jobs securely. And when trust is lost, it can cost a lot of money. So you might know 23andMe. They had a breach in October 2023, 7 million people. It's a biotech company. They never recovered. And actually, a month and a half ago, they went bankrupt. And Hertz, ironically, their customer data platform partner, the company responsible for moving customer data around, had a breach a little while ago when it lost contact details, date of birth, passports, social security numbers, driving licenses, and credit card data. And Hertz is facing lawsuits for up to 4% of its global revenue, per jurisdiction, that is. So that's multiple X. But we still need to verify our customers. We need still to trust them, and we still need to offer them unique, tailored experiences. So we need to change. We need a new paradigm. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that before, but the internet doesn't have a human identity layer. The core protocols of the internet were actually built to verify the identities of machines, and they work very well. So at Magic, we give every person their own personal machine, their ID agent. An ID agent basically interacts with apps, sites, agentic AI, APIs, MCPs, and it's built to secure our identity online. It's built to either store or just fetch, orchestrate our data from multiple places, and it's capable of representing us in online transactions. So Magic ID agents mean friction-free access meeting data security. In the old world, people log into systems. In the new world, everyone has their own system. Companies talk to that system privately with their personal data secured. In the old world, platforms track and traffic data. In the new world, our agents work together privately. In the old world, data flows through big platforms. In the new world, everyone's data is in their own domain. Instead of sending into places, we bring apps to the data to do the work it needs to do. And in the old world, verification is done centrally. In this new world, verification can have reputation. It carries over. It's peer-to-peer. You can think of it in simple terms. I install any AI into my identity agent. I let it do something on my behalf using my data privately. Sometimes I might want to give it an OK on something. So here you go. Go look at my credit card transactions. Look for suspicious stuff. I give you authority to talk to my credit card provider and raise claims. A little bit later, you just bought a Prada bag. But it's the first time you buy from Prada. Is it really you? Well, I raised the claim, but you might want to freeze this card. And that has to happen for all of you that might be thinking about how does the data flow work. In today's world, the data flow is extremely messy. Your data shouldn't be going to all these AI companies, big platforms to execute this flow. And for the time being, we are working with some affinity groups, and more specifically, I'm going to show you this demo. This is a military affinity network. We have 5.2 million active users using agents. You verify for them, prove you're military, and the moment you do, you get an agent. That is built on this website. So you don't have to have another wallet. It uses private keys on the device. But most importantly, when you decide what you want, and you bounce from that website to another, the other website already knows what it needs to know about you. And then the possibilities are endless. You don't just sign in, which is what SSOs do, or open authentication. You can do a lot of different things with it. And I wonder if do I have time? Sure. So the example I'm going to show you now, it's called military deals. I'm not signed into this website. It doesn't know who I am. When I go back, my agent carries a security token. I'll click on that link. It will bounce me momentarily into my agent. And the moment I arrive to Vetpacks again, to military deals, I will be a known user. I start to think this should have gone a bit faster, this demo. All right. I think I'm coming to it. Yep. So military deals doesn't know me. This website has my agent. I click on military deals. And yep. The moment I land here, I got an account. And what's interesting with this specific use case, we didn't direct this customer how to build it. They decided they don't want to store any of my data. What they did instead, the moment I made that connection, they put a private communications API in my agent, so they can still talk to me, they can still email me with offers, but they actually have known of the liability of storing my PII in their own servers. So I logged in, maybe suboptimal, did I need to log in? That's how their systems work, but I didn't store any of my data there. So they know who I am, they know how to contact me, but I am protected, and they are protected as well from breaches. Thank you very much. And in the panel.
Right, introduce yourselves. First of all, Eric.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Drury. I'm an independent consultant in digital identity and digital trust. I work in Europe with and Asia Pacific with governments, organizations, and enterprise.
We know who you are, Thanasis.
Yes, I was going to say.
StJohn.
Hi all. I'm StJohn from DataSapien. I've got slightly blocked ear, so just if I start booming, apologies. But my background, so at DataSapien, we effectively put brains into apps. We have a little software bundle that embeds into any app to give it a personal data store on device, and also a three-tier intelligence stack, including LLMs, compact LLMs. That embeds it into any existing customer app, where you can build apps around it. And the intention is to basically kind of evolve mobile apps so they become completely kind of human-centric and distributed, which we can now do technically. A lot of the thinking came from many years back. I was doing some stuff for T-Mobile when I was at a company called agency.com, and came up with omnichannel strategy, which is about 2000. And the idea for that was basically that the mobile phone would be in the middle of customer communications, and we could wrap communications around the individual. Unfortunately, omnichannel then evolved to become 50 ways to spam your customer, which wasn't the original intention. But that's my background. In between, I've done a number of startups, including messaging startups across 5 different continents in the world, done a couple of exits to the States. For me, this is a kind of a real passion project because the internet needs to evolve on. And I'm about 3 times over time on my intro. So I'll move on, sorry.
And I'm Mary Camacho. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Visvere. We're working on document, basically know your document technology, which kind of is at the center of, well, ID is one huge part of it, but so is provenance and the content itself. And then background behind that is that I was the executive director of the Holo Foundation, which is a distributed ledger technology that is not a blockchain. I'll say that one. It is not reliant on cryptocurrency. So it's really looking at how do we use some of these newer technologies to kind of continue the process of evolving validity and verification with real business use cases.
Great. Well, Thanasis gave us one good illustration of how this might look now and where we're at. So, but let's just get an idea of how what the state of the market is now in terms of how many people have agents, how many organizations have agents, and where it might go. So Eric, maybe we'll start with you. Can you sort of summarize the climate and talk about where it might go and why this is such a pressing topic?
Well, agents, the first thing to say, I think, is that there is no definition of agents, although there is the concept that they will be autonomous at some point. That's the ultimate goal, is that they are autonomous. But companies like Salesforce have already started launching agents for their customers. Their target is 30 million, I think, and 30 could be 30 billion. It's moving fast. There's quite a lot of the evolution is moving from agentic workflow to eventually fully autonomous agents. And I don't think that there are really a huge amount, other than what Thanasis is doing, of agents in production out in the wild. Most of them are in very controlled environments because we don't fully trust AI at the moment. So at the moment, it's really just we're in the exploration phase. There's protocols being developed, but there's no standard. So it's very early days, but moving very, very fast.
St. John, do you want to add to that? So you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I just agree with that. I mean, Salesforce, their entire sales team, global sales team, are being incentivized this year to push agents. So we're going to see a lot of kind of traction in terms of sales and pushing agents, but because there's no clear definition, I mean, I would imagine, from everything I'm seeing at the moment, a lot of it is kind of individual use cases and point solutions. The critical thing is when we get to joining up workflows and kind of driving kind of outcomes for customers across many, many hops. And I think we're kind of a long way from that. Just as a shout out to our stuff, our architecture is similar to Salesforce, but all done on the device. So we have this kind of multi-tier intelligence, etc. And the only place where all of that deep personal information should really exist is with you as an individual. And if you have an agent working on your devices, and there are other examples beyond us as well, but that, for me, must be the architecture we go for, right? Because, and the interesting for mobile operators is this is the world we've been living in for the last 20, 30 years, driving everything mobile. I was involved in something similar to M-Pesa in the Philippines, kind of early days, for example, right? And if we're mobile-centric, we can actually kind of evolve much more quickly than this kind of big tech, centralized, cloud-based, where all of our agents live in someone's cloud, doesn't seem to me to be the solution, the way forward. So we're seeing a huge amount of hype, obviously, but it's going to normalize over the next year or two, I think.
Thanasis, how does your solution work on mobile devices?
So I agree with what Sin says, that we have to have sovereignty in some way, because otherwise, we've seen what happened with programmatic ads and when big platforms control so much of our data. So if you add on top of that the relationship people build with AIs nowadays, it's going to get really ugly. And on the sovereignty part, we use cloud. Keys for access and for decryption are in the user's device. So we don't store the keys, we don't have access to them. But cloud has other positive aspects, right? So like when you use cloud, your agent can be live 24/7, 365, and do stuff on your behalf, which I don't know how you can do with device easily without doing a lot of workarounds. So it's a matter of, there isn't a silver bullet. We're all trying to go towards a future that is more egalitarian in a way. I mean, I don't know if I can say that in an event like that. Anyway, but the ability to make it bulletproof, I don't think anyone can do it.
But and I think it's going to be a combination, which is that of different solutions.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is very complementary to what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then beyond that, you'll have what we're calling private LLMs, where an organization will take an open source LLM, tune it for their particular needs, host it in their environment.
Right.
So you have almost like an organizational brain, which is completely in the organization's control. You're not shipping customer data off to California.
Yes.
And it's tunable, and it's plugging into their existing many databases, etc.
Yep.
And then you have a customer having their own brain that basically works with the organization's brain. And the beautiful thing about that setup is you're creating an ecosystem where you have kind of strengths of the intelligence in the right places to drive outcomes. But it's pitting kind of, for me, big brands and big companies which already have deep relationships with customers.
Yes.
Against big tech,
I
where you're
agree.
shipping everything to California, right?
Which goes...
Or worse, Virginia. Sorry.
Go ahead, Mary.
No, I think what's interesting about what you're working on and what we're working on is also that we're dealing with the peer-to-peer mix of that is actually one layer in the mix, that you have to bring keys down to devices, but you can keep data both on devices and in some version of a cloud. I think clouds are going to have to change. I think some clouds are changing, and not enough in Europe right now. One of the things that I see problematic in that space in particular, and I think this is an interesting thing, although this is mobile-oriented, I know there's a lot of telecom people here, is that there's not a lot of European cloud where your data is supposedly protected versus the United States, where we know it's not, that actually have great sub-account and other types of functions that will allow you to have functions so that people can have more private cloud truly viewed. You get a version of it with OVH and a couple of others here, but it's still the Googles and it's the AWSs of the world who are controlling the ones that have the better feature sets. And I think that's a big deal, because when you start talking about peer-to-peer and you really are saying, no, the agent belongs, and you're talking about ownership, you want that to be all the way through the stack correctly, and we're not quite handling that yet.
And I think beyond that, it's also kind of data going off to LLMs.
Yeah. Well, and I think the LLMs should be on those spaces, but it should be on spaces that we know we have the control of and the agentic control of.
There are good open source models where you can host your own
exactly.
LLMs. The tricky thing is if you're sending customer data off to OpenAI, there's going to be a massive shortage of data because they're running out of data to train the models on. The next frontier is getting personal data into those LLMs.
And they've been saying that for 18 months, exactly.
And if you look at the latest uses of LLMs, basically for this year, it's in HBR, I think last month, the top 2 or 3 cases are using
private data.
Is consumers using LLMs as counselors.
Yes.
Right, so they're sharing deeply personal data with the LLMs, which is training up the LLMs, right? And then starting to develop an emotional connection with those LLMs. And you can kind of imagine a few ways where this may go sideways, right?
Oh, many.
But the high-level play there is basically just trying to pull more and more personal data into those LLMs. And I think...
But they can do that. They can do that. I mean, that's where we've moved on to. But you can do it with model training. You can do it with model training with distributed data instead of doing it with centralized data. Exactly.
It means there's an opportunity for more human-centric solutions.
Exactly.
To actually kind of pro your customers, where you're not sharing all of that data out to other places.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing. I think we're just talking about it in different technologies.
Sure.
To that extent, last bit, and go back to Tim, because I can see you want to go.
No, I'm happy for you to keep talking. Everyone's heard enough from me today.
One of the things that we got to do as an industry, including obviously the telecoms as leaders in telecommunications, is think about how this new stack looks. And as Sin said earlier, you have relationships with your customers. So what does a multi-party collaboration look like where you are still the controllers of your customers' data, or let's say profiles, identity, which you are today in many scenarios, but still we don't use the traditional methods of using the cloud, especially when it comes to AI, so we don't have to actually send all your customers' data to the big AI platforms in California. I think there's something with California in this panel. Do you live in California?
No.
Yeah. So there is a lot of transformation to happen, but the good news is that for the first time ever with AI, I think we have the power to actually do the transformation because the inherent value we can bring, even from a small data set, because you don't need structured data anymore. Like your users will speak or interact with the AI, it will learn. So it changes the game entirely of how we interact with our customers, how we can interact with them.
So if we're in, this is something you've touched on already, but if we're in a world where we have our own assigned agents dealing with enterprises agents somewhere that we can't see, doing things that we've trusted them to do on our behalf, how do we strike the balance there between allowing them to do that, but also having some kind of data trail, some kind of knowledge of what's going on? So Eric, it's a big question, but how do you think we ought to approach that?
Well, the first thing that I think in my research on AI agents, everything that I've heard is identity is a key component. Without an identity, and I'm not talking about just a unique identifier attached to an agent, but an identity, which means more in-depth information about that agent. And one of the key things is, what is its purpose? What is it built to do? And I think here we have to be very specific. If your agent is built and it can only do one thing, and that's to go and fetch the weather, and then coordinate with another agent to go and fetch, transport timelines, et cetera. So you need the identifier, the identity of the agent, what its purpose is, and then who is accountable for that agent, who is controlling that agent, who's offering them to you. So those three things, identity, purpose, and accountability. And from the human aspect, the customer aspect, we want explainability and transparency. And I think it's an opportunity with AI to say we don't have to use the same UX and the same patterns that we've been using up to now with the internet. We have powerful AI that allows us to be more explanatory, be more transparent with data that's being shared, who it's being shared with. And in the early versions of AI, it's really controlled environments. And if you trust an AI agent, it's because you're on a domain that you trust. For example, if you're with Military Connect and you trust Military Connect and they say, I'm going to give you an agent, if you trust Military Connect, you trust that agent, okay, you're happy for that agent to work on your behalf for maybe one hop to the next partner. Yeah. But if that agent then goes off and does 3 or 4 other hops and starts talking to other agents, and we have no visibility to what's happening there, we have no visibility to the data that's being exchanged, who has access to the data, who's keeping logs, and the accountability gets really, really difficult. So those are I think the multi-cooperative agents working together. That's where things get really complicated. Because in the traditional sense, it's the same information being passed back and forth now. Yes. But how is it being passed? Is it staying on device or et cetera?
And you made a really good point. Like there will be many agents doing many different things. Yeah. And then the example Eric made is like they will go and they'll talk to each other and they might have to exchange data. And I think you can easily see how messy that gets, right? So the paradigm of sharing data, I think we're past that. We're past the world where we can share data freely with parties, because what happened to herds, right? So you give your data to herds, and unknowingly 1,000 other parties might get it. And that if you do with agents daily, I mean, like my head is going to explode, honestly.
But aren't we dealing with that already? I mean, like this is the whole thing. We were just asking about reading the terms of service. Yeah. And like if you do read them, they say that they're going to share their data with 350 other third parties anyway. Exactly. So the thing that that strikes me about what we're saying about agents is that, I mean, people are going to be nervous about it, right? But only if it comes out in a certain way. People and I'm talking about the customers, the use of these things, and if we make it all about AI and agency and agentic, this, that, and the other, it sounds very scary. But under the hood, what we're doing with private keys, we've been doing this in a centralized capacity for, I don't know, decades. Yeah. And nobody knows what keys are. Like, I'm talking about the customers out there, right? They don't know that they're being given keys that aren't really their own, that aren't really their private ones, that they're not controlling. And then all this stuff happens under the hood. I mean, if agents are going to go early on, it's going to go the same way. It's going to go under the hood, and people aren't going to know what it is. Yeah. And that is scary to me. And the same reason for why I don't like the private key methodology at this stage is because you don't have the capacity to make a difference and have true agency as the human being making choices. And I'm worried about that in some ways, and I don't see a way around it immediately. So I'd be really curious if you guys could actually talk about how do we get a better, real experience for the user without having to hide it.
And then you add in hallucinations.
Oh,
And
dear.
it's even more complicated.
Just add that all in.
So, I mean, I think...
a clarification to Mary. So what is, are you referring to PKI specifically, or what else?
Well, pretty much. I mean, but I'm saying if it, as this looks to go forward, we can have it on a B2B level, where they're gonna the agents and stuff, and we can use all that language. But if you could start going B2C on this stuff, it's going to have to get simplified.
I think it's an incredibly important point, especially for right now where we are, because I don't think there are many people in certainly the AI industry, unless you're raising a $50 billion round, that believe that AI is going to become intelligent in the next 6 months, right? We kind of know it's a tool, and for one of our demo apps, we've got an emotion tracker, and we use generative AI on device under the hood to generate insights. With some guardrails around it, but it's not a chatbot. It's a generation tool, right? So, from a user point of view, I'm getting a job done, and it's about reminding ourselves that we're driving outcomes for customers, because customers will hire a brand to get something done for them, and they don't really. They want to know that things are secure, and they want to know that their data is not going to be, they're not going to be abused or taken for a sucker or anything.
But the trust
issues. They want to
issues.
get a job done, right?
But the trust issues are saying that they're also pushing back against some of these things. And so the question for me is, how do you keep it simple and actually address the transparency? Because too much transparency is just like doing terms of service. We can call that transparent, but nobody reads it. How do we make it really useful and more true agency is to me what I want to hear how that one's handling. I don't have the answer on that. I know I'm sitting up on the panel, but I don't have that answer. And if the more we can dive into that is to me where the juice is.
No silver bullet answers, I think, again.
But I think
I'll
we
take
have
it.
to remember that, I mean, so just quickly,
Yes.
it's not about you're delegating agency to an agent, right? So you're delegating very definite, very well defined kind of, if I go to a travel agent, I'm asking my travel agent to do something very specifically.
Yes.
Right? They can go and search lots of things and then come back with a list of holidays that I then choose from, right? So basically, I'm then in control of that relationship.
Yeah. Eventually, you might stop being, right? So eventually, the example is like, I talked to Siri on my bike, and I was like, send a message to Rebecca. And it's like, do you want to use WhatsApp or messages? So a couple of times I said WhatsApp, and then it just never asked me again. And I just thought, I prefer WhatsApp. So eventually you might get as intimate that your AI knows what vacation you want.
We absolutely will,
Yeah.
quite quickly. But that's, you still have agency over that. You can go in and basically, if you wanted to change to iMessage, you could do that, right?
That's the conundrum,
you
right?
should be.
We want them to be autonomous, but then we want to remain in the loop. And so I think it's finding those use cases in the early days that are low risk. I mean, the use cases today are employees saying, go out and search the web and bring back a recap of news that is interesting to what I'm working on at the moment. Mm-hmm. And it's completely done autonomous. There's virtually no risk. Mm-hmm. But if you then ask for the agent to then write a summary and send that to your boss, without you looking at it, then you start adding a little bit more, difficulty. But again, it can explode in so many different directions. I think we have to, and that's why I really think that these agents, I think of it in terms of an airplane where every bolt has a specification, every nut has a specification, and it only serves a very specific purpose. So if something goes wrong, you can say, what agent is in charge of this very specific, outcome or specific, query? And those agents can coordinate together to get things done. But I think if you just say to an agent, go out and do something and come back, you don't know where it goes wrong. You don't know where the data is going. You don't know who's responsible.
I think a lot of that stuff, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's going to be individual point solutions.
Yeah.
And then gradually over time they'll join up. I mean, there's a lot of hype about MCP and everything's going to talk to each other with no protocols and what it's like.
Yeah, that's going to go, huh?
But the person understanding you, I mean, that travel example, got a family for one wants to do city, one wants to do beach, daughter's allergic to peanuts, another daughter likes swimming or whatever it is, right? Those things at the moment, a travel agent will have to ask lots of questions to try and understand and a good travel agent will know what questions to ask. But all of all that data is on your phones, right? So if you have a family account with that travel agent, the AI will automatically be able to come up with the top 3 perfect holidays for that time of year, matching your calendars, everything else, right? And that we're very, very close to that.
Yeah.
So.
What's where does regulation and government fit into all this? Because Thanasis was talking about, and it's a topic that's always a subject that's always mentioned, is freeing organisations from the obligation to store your data, which, you know, they all do it at the moment. They don't really want to do it because it's you know, it's a security risk, a privacy risk, a cost. If we're in a world of bringing the app to the data, then how do we give free organisations of that responsibility, but also give them some kind of audit trail so that they, you know, they have a story to tell when things go wrong or whatever? Thanasis, what's your feeling?
Yeah, it's a complex question. I think to break it down maybe on who's the controller, and then what does that mean from PII perspective. So one way we're doing it for enterprises specifically is that maybe a drawing would help, but basically it's a bit like an infrastructure play where you have your private cloud where you can provide agents to your users, 1 per user. Every agent is its own sandbox little server. You can host data, but also you can just pull it from other places. And then we just manage the keys. We maintain that private provider. We don't store the data ourselves. The keys are on the user's device, so they have the authority, they have the decryption power. And then the enterprises, they still are in control. They are the data controllers of that user for whatever use case they have. It might be an agentic AI use case where it just fetch me the weather and tell me if I should go to work with a bike, whatever. Or it can be a reusable play with their ecosystem where Vodafone has a bunch of partners, and instead of sending my data to the partners with my authority, it can bring a partner up to my data to execute the task it needs to execute. So the controller, I think what you said about enterprises not wanting the data is half true. Obviously, they don't want the liability, but also because we live in a world where the alternative doesn't exist, it's so difficult to imagine it. We need to find what is the middle ground. How do we hop, you know, pebble by pebble to get to that future?
Well, I also think that there's a little bit of a fantasy side of it in terms of us wanting to keep the data to ourselves in a way, because I think we forget about the generational, and I think it was great we saw the age conversation earlier. We were mostly talking about people who were underage, but just want to remind us about the other side of the spectrum. As we get older and we have this level of complexity that's built up, we want less and less to worry about these things. I've watched this happen with aging parents. I've worked in industries that are dealing with older generations, and it may not apply quite to everybody who's super techie and might come into some of these places, but in general, the keeping it local and keeping control of the keys also creates a whole series of other problems for humans as they age, and for support systems as we get into those years. And so I think that coming at this, we've got to have it be a little bit more resilient than that.
Yeah, I agree.
And we have to think about that up front.
It's what you said earlier, right? So like we need to have the right stack, in my opinion. As long as we have something like that looks a bit like the right stack, then we can add more encryption, we can add quantum encryption, we can add key fragmentation, like all these are a bit like point solutions again.
But you know, we say that as if it's offhand, but that key fragmentation, for example, it could be exactly the sort of thing that's necessary to create familial trust systems, right? And things that you can do. And right now we're giving that back over to one of the large trust providers, supposedly, and then if it doesn't map, if our family life doesn't map to their understanding of it. I recently had an issue where I couldn't move. We accidentally set up my niece's child under my family, and then I couldn't move them out into my niece's family with Google. So it was quite an issue. I mean, but those things are real, and they're very problematic when you talk about how they affect human life. So these things are critical for what we're talking about, and we've got to get it right.
We've just got a few more minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone?
I have a question.
We have got one.
I knew it was going to be James, actually.
Hi, I'm James Monaghan from Mission. My question is, we probably know that this is going to be delightfully packaged, incredibly convenient and compelling, just like we all want to not really think about the nitty-gritty of comparing airline flights. So we'd like to sit at home and eat candy all day. And at some point, the awareness that these things aren't good for us is an important part of the conversation. And so we've talked a lot today about the role that technology can play in protecting our data and preserving our agency. And I fully agree. Without the technical means to exercise that control, the conversation is moot. But I'm keen to hear what the panelists think the other side of that coin is in terms of the role of education and regulation and things like that might have to play as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give it a go. Education is obviously paramount. The problem with education, it takes a long time. And some people just want to eat candies on their sofa, right? So we've been around that block, and James and I have worked before when I was at Onfido and he was in Evernham. We did this portable ID pilot where Deloitte was part of it and Post Office. And we've been around the block multiple times. So I think the only way we can make it succeed is if we make it as easy as possible, as easy as it is for using big tech. But then it's our responsibility to educate people. So we are very small and we're trying to do videos and trying to go out and talk about these things. And what we realize is that the reach these things have is tiny. Because one, people don't know them, so you have to make them super simple to get them. Two, when they start seeing something that remotely stresses them, they just don't want to see it. So I'm getting to the point now where I think education is critical, obviously, but it's 20% and 80% is convenience and being invisible in a way to the user's eye. Because as Sin said, they came here to buy a plane ticket. They didn't come here for an identity, a secret key, all this sort of complicated stuff that make our heads hurt.
And I think regulation always follows, right? It is something that should, and we should be looking at it, but it's hard to, at the front end of something, and technically, if we want to leave the open space for the innovation, we oftentimes let it get ahead a little bit so that we can understand what are some of those consequences and what do we need to regulate. I think regulation is required. I just think we need to be more open to it in the aftermath of having some innovation happen.
Yeah.
Eric, can we answer your question?
Well, I was going to follow up there. I think the majority of agents will be used in business settings and they'll be invisible. I mean, if the ultimate objective is autonomy and businesses can automate a lot of their workflows and work processes, I think that's where a lot of the agents will be. But when it comes to, I think a lot of the times our reflex is when we say agent, we think personal agent acting on my behalf. And the other thing that I think that we use AI, we say AI can do so much now. It can create a 25-page research paper with a single sentence prompt. And it would take, and I think we take the power of AI and apply it to these problems that we said before we couldn't solve because they're too difficult. And now we say, well, we can do so much with AI. Why not apply those to the problems that we can foresee after 30 years of social media and the internet, and say, how can we make smart friction? How can we make sure that the user knows exactly what's happening with their data, that they have reasonable consent and all this kind of stuff? So I think we need to really turn that inwards and apply it to the solutions we're building.
And isn't this also a battle for survival in a way? Like if you think about it, I'm gonna be a bit morbid here, but the big tech is consuming everything right now. So it's about giving this trust back to consumers and maintaining the brand loyalty that you all have with your customers. Ultimately, everyone will use ChatGPT if we continue like that, and that's not good for anyone because they already are consuming other companies and they're not going to stop. So it's not a great future, I think, if we don't come together. I heard earlier, come together, right? So age verification, we should come together and do something about it.
Okay, I'll leave the last word to you, StJohn, because we're close to finishing.
Thank you. I think there's a massive opportunity for a change in the narrative. Right?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of the narrative, and I was saying earlier about kind of in the industry, we know that AI is not going to become super intelligent in the next 6 months. However, that message is bleeding out into the mass market, and there's kind of concerns. And then we talk about kind of AI as if people are going to be, it's going to be forced upon people. But AI is just a tool. It's a very powerful tool, right? But there's a massive opportunity for big organizations, rather than big tech, to actually use these tools to serve journeys better for customers and drive better outcomes invisibly under the hood, as you mentioned. And doing that quickly over the next 2 or 3 years is actually going to then alleviate a lot of the fears about what's happening with AI, because it becomes practical benefit. And that's the big step we need to make in the next 2 or 3 years, I think, right?
Excellent. Well, what an amazing topic. It's just going to get more and more prescient as we go on. So thanks very much for the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.